The bustling airport terminal hummed with activity as travelers rushed to catch their flights. Amidst the chaos, a distinguished man in his mid-50s calmly made his way through the crowd. His salt and pepper hair and confident stride set him apart, but it was the crisp white uniform adorned with gold stripes and insignia that truly caught the eye. This was Admiral James Carter, a decorated officer with over 30 years of service in the United States Navy. As he approached the check-in counter, Admiral Carter couldn't help but reflect on his journey. Growing up in a small town in Georgia, he had faced countless obstacles on his path to becoming one of the highest-ranking African-American officers in the Navy. But today, his mind was focused on a different mission, getting home to surprise his daughter for her college graduation. The line inched forward, and Admiral Carter found himself face-to-face with a young airline employee named Sarah. Her eyes widened slightly as she took in his uniform, but her professional demeanor never wavered. "Good afternoon, sir. How may I assist you today?" Admiral Carter smiled warmly. "Good afternoon. I have a reservation for the 2:15 flight to Atlanta." Sarah tapped away at her keyboard, her brow furrowing slightly. "I see your reservation, sir. However, it appears we're experiencing some issues with seat assignments. Would you mind waiting a moment while I sort this out?" "Of course," Admiral Carter replied, stepping to the side to allow the next passenger to approach the counter. As he waited, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. He had flown this route countless times before without any problems. Several minutes passed before Sarah gestured for him to return to the counter. "I apologize for the delays, sir. It seems there was a mix-up with your ticket. We can get you on the flight, but I'm afraid we only have middle seats available in economy class." Admiral Carter's eyebrows raised in surprise. "I'm sorry, but there must be some mistake. I booked a first-class ticket over a month ago." Sarah's cheeks flushed as she stammered. I'm not sure what happened, sir. The system shows your reservation was changed. I can try to find a supervisor to help, but with the flight departing soon, I'm not sure we can resolve this before boarding." A flicker of frustration crossed Admiral Carter's face, but he quickly composed himself. He had faced far greater challenges in his life and career. "I understand. Thank you for your assistance, Sarah. I'll take the available seat." As he made his way to the crowded gate area, Admiral Carter couldn't help but wonder if there was more to this situation than a simple computer glitch. Throughout his career, he had encountered his fair share of prejudice and discrimination, often subtle but sometimes blatant. Could this be another such instance? The boarding process began, and Admiral Carter found himself wedged between two other passengers in the narrow economy seat. As he struggled to find a comfortable position for his long legs, he overheard a conversation between two flight attendants passing through the aisle. "Can you believe they bumped an admiral to economy?" one whispered. "I heard the pilot's friend needed a last-minute first-class seat." Admiral Carter's jaw clenched, but he remained silent. He had learned long ago that losing his temper would only reinforce negative stereotypes. Instead, he focused on the reason for his trip: his daughter's proud face as she walked across the stage to receive her diploma. As the plane taxied to the runway, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is your captain speaking. We're looking at clear skies and smooth flying conditions for our trip to Atlanta today. Our flight time will be approximately 2 hours and 15 minutes. Something about the captain's voice struck a chord with Admiral Carter. It sounded vaguely familiar, but he couldn't quite place it. He shrugged off the thought, chalking it up to fatigue from a long week of meetings at the Pentagon. The flight progressed uneventfully, with Admiral Carter attempting to catch up on some paperwork despite the cramped conditions. As they began their descent into Atlanta, the captain's voice once again filled the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our final approach into Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. The local time is 4:30 p.m., and the temperature is a pleasant 75 degrees. We hope you've enjoyed your flight with us today." There was a brief pause before the captain continued, his tone shifting slightly. "Before we land, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge a very special passenger on board with us today. It's not often we have the honor of flying with such a distinguished member of our armed forces." Admiral Carter's head snapped up, his eyes widening in surprise. He hadn't mentioned his rank to anyone on the flight crew. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are privileged to have with us today Admiral James Carter of the United States Navy. Admiral Carter has served our country with distinction for over 3 decades, breaking barriers and inspiring future generations of leaders. A murmur of excitement rippled through the cabin as passengers craned their necks, trying to catch a glimpse of the Admiral. Admiral Carter sat frozen in his seat, a mix of emotions washing over him. Admiral Carter, on behalf of our entire crew and all the passengers on board, I want to express our deepest gratitude for your service and sacrifice. It is an honor to have you on our flight today. As the plane touched down on the runway, Admiral Carter's mind raced. How did the captain know who he was? And why make this announcement now, after the earlier mix-up with his seat? The aircraft came to a stop at the gate, and passengers began to gather their belongings. As Admiral Carter stood to retrieve his carry-on bag, a flight attendant approached him. Admiral Carter, the captain has requested to speak with you before you deplane. If you could please follow me to the cockpit. Intrigued and slightly wary, Admiral Carter nodded and followed the attendant to the front of the plane. As the cockpit door swung open, he found himself face to face with a grinning pilot in his mid-40s. Admiral Carter, the pilot said, snapping to attention and offering a crisp salute. Lieutenant Commander Michael Thompson, sir, it's an honor to see you again. Recognition dawned on Admiral Carter's face as memories flooded back. He saw before him not just the pilot of this flight, but a young ensign he had mentored years ago, a promising officer who had faced his own struggles with discrimination in the Navy. As the two men shook hands, the weight of the day's events hung in the air between them. There was much to discuss, many questions to be answered. But for now, in this moment of unexpected reunion, Admiral Carter felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps this chance encounter was more than just coincidence. Perhaps it was an opportunity to address the challenges that still persisted, even at the highest levels of service. The story of what transpired on that flight, and the conversations that followed, would soon capture the nation's attention. But as Admiral Carter stepped off the plane and into the bright Atlanta sunshine, he knew that the most important chapter was yet to be written. As Admiral Carter made his way through the bustling Atlanta airport, his mind raced with thoughts of the peculiar flight he just experienced. The sudden recognition from the captain, Lieutenant Commander Michael Thompson, had stirred up a whirlwind of memories and emotions. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story than met the eye. Stepping onto the escalator, Admiral Carter's attention was drawn to a nearby television screen. A breaking news banner flashed across the bottom, announcing an upcoming press conference addressing allegations of discrimination within the airline industry. The timing seemed almost too coincidental, and he wondered if there was any connection to his own experience earlier that day. Outside the airport, Admiral Carter hailed a taxi, his mind still preoccupied with the day's events. As the car merged into traffic, he pulled out his phone and dialed a familiar number. After a few rings, a warm voice answered, "Dad, are you in Atlanta already?" The sound of his daughter's voice immediately brought a smile to Admiral Carter's face. "Hey, sweetheart. Yes, I just landed. I can't wait to see you tomorrow at the ceremony." As they chatted about her excitement for graduation, Admiral Carter debated whether to mention the incident on the plane. He didn't want to overshadow her big day, but he also knew that as a budding journalist, she would be intrigued by the story. Before he could decide, his daughter's voice took on a more serious tone. "Dad, have you seen the news? There's a big story breaking about discrimination in air travel. It's all over social media." Admiral Carter's grip tightened on his phone. "I saw a headline at the airport, but I don't know the details. What are they saying?" His daughter's words tumbled out in a rush. "It's crazy, Dad. There are reports of high-ranking military officers and government officials being bumped from first class or denied upgrades, especially people of color. Some whistleblower leaked internal emails suggesting it was intentional. People are furious." The taxi driver, who had been listening to the conversation, suddenly spoke up. "Excuse me, sir. Are you talking about that airline scandal? My cousin works as a gate agent, and he's been telling me some wild stories lately." Admiral Carter leaned forward, his interest piqued. "What kind of stories?" The driver glanced in the rearview mirror before continuing. "He says there's been pressure from higher-ups to manage certain passengers. Something about keeping the first-class cabin comfortable for their top-tier customers. It's all hush-hush, but he's worried about losing his job if he doesn't play along." As the taxi wound its way through Atlanta's streets, Admiral Carter's mind raced. Could his experience have been part of a larger, systemic issue? The coincidence seemed too great to ignore. Arriving at his hotel, Admiral Carter thanked the driver and made his way to the check-in desk. As he waited in line, he noticed a group of people huddled around a laptop, watching a live stream of the press conference he'd seen advertised at the airport. The CEO of a major airline was at the podium, his face etched with concern. "We take these allegations very seriously," he was saying. "Our company has always prided itself on treating all passengers with respect and dignity, regardless of their background or position. We are launching a full internal investigation and will cooperate fully with any external inquiries." Admiral Carter couldn't help but think of Sarah, the young airline employee who had seemed so flustered by his ticket issue. Had she been caught in the middle of something bigger than a simple computer glitch? As he settled into his hotel room, Admiral Carter's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Lieutenant Commander Thompson. "Sir, I hope you arrived safely. I can't stop thinking about what happened today. There's more to this story, and I think you need to know. Can we meet?" Admiral Carter hesitated. His instincts told him that pursuing this could open a can of worms he wasn't prepared for. He had come to Atlanta to celebrate his daughter's achievement, not to get embroiled in a potential scandal. But as a leader who had fought against discrimination his entire career, could he really turn a blind eye? Before he could reply, another message came through, this time from an unknown number. "Admiral Carter, my name is Evelyn Ross. I'm an investigative journalist working on a story about discrimination in the airline industry. I believe you may have information that could be crucial to exposing the truth. Would you be willing to speak with me?" Admiral Carter sat heavily on the edge of the bed, the weight of the situation settling on his shoulders. He thought back to his early days in the Navy, the challenges he had faced, and the mentors who had stood by him. He thought of the young officers he had guided throughout his career, like Michael Thompson, who were still navigating a world that wasn't always fair or just. As the sun began to set over Atlanta, casting long shadows across the hotel room, Admiral Carter made a decision. He couldn't ignore what was happening, not when he had the power to make a difference. But he also couldn't let it overshadow his daughter's big day. He picked up his phone and began to type a message to Lieutenant Commander Thompson. "Michael, I appreciate you reaching out. I agree that we need to discuss what happened today. Let's meet tomorrow after my daughter's graduation ceremony. There's a lot we need to talk about." Next, he turned his attention to the journalist's message. After careful consideration, he replied, "Ms. Ross, I understand you're working on an important story. While I'm not comfortable discussing details at this time, I would be willing to meet with you in a few days to hear more about your investigation." As he hit send on both messages, Admiral Carter felt a mix of apprehension and determination. He knew that the coming days would be challenging, potentially putting him in the spotlight in a way he had never experienced before. But if there was a chance to address systemic issues and create positive change, he had to take it. Looking out the window at the twinkling lights of Atlanta, Admiral Carter's thoughts turned to his daughter. She was about to embark on her own career, facing a world that, despite progress, still held many obstacles for people of color. He hoped that by taking a stand now, he could help pave the way for a more equitable future for her and countless others. As night fell over the city, Admiral Carter began to prepare for the next day's graduation ceremony. But even as he laid out his dress uniform and polished his shoes, his mind was racing with questions. What would his conversation with Michael Thompson reveal? What evidence did the journalist have? And how deep did this alleged discrimination really go? The answers to these questions remained elusive, but one thing was certain. Admiral James Carter's trip to Atlanta had become much more than a simple journey to celebrate his daughter's achievement. It had become a potential turning point in a much larger story, one that could have far-reaching consequences for the airline industry and beyond. As he finally settled into bed, Admiral Carter's last thoughts before drifting off to sleep were of hope. Hope for justice, hope for change, and hope for a future where stories like his would be relics of the past rather than headlines of the present. The morning of his daughter's graduation dawned bright and clear, but Admiral Carter's mind was far from serene. As he donned his dress whites, a sense of pride mingled with the undercurrent of unease that had plagued him since yesterday's flight. He was determined to focus on his daughter's achievements today, pushing thoughts of airline scandals and potential investigations to the back of his mind. The ceremony was a blur of emotions, pride swelling in his chest as he watched his daughter, Alicia, cross the stage to receive her diploma, her head held high and a brilliant smile lighting up her face. As the newly minted graduates tossed their caps into the air, Admiral Carter felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was why he had fought so hard throughout his career, to create a better world for the next generation. As the crowds began to disperse, Alicia rushed to embrace her father. "Dad, I'm so glad you made it," she exclaimed, her eyes shining with joy and unshed tears. Admiral Carter hugged her tightly, pushing away the nagging thoughts of his upcoming meeting with Lieutenant Commander Thompson. "I wouldn't have missed this for the world, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you." As they made their way through the throng of celebrating families, Admiral Carter couldn't help but notice the occasional double takes and whispers his uniform elicited. He was used to attention, but today it felt different, more scrutinizing. Had news of yesterday's incident somehow spread? Their celebratory lunch was a welcome respite, filled with laughter and plans for the future. Alicia animatedly discussed her upcoming internship at a prestigious news network, her passion for journalism evident in every word. Admiral Carter listened intently, offering advice and encouragement, all the while acutely aware of the ticking clock. His meeting with Thompson loomed ever closer. As they finished their meal, Alicia's phone buzzed insistently. Her eyes widened as she scrolled through the incoming messages. "Dad, you won't believe this. Remember that airline discrimination story I mentioned yesterday? It's exploded overnight. There are reports coming in from all over the country. Military personnel, government officials, even celebrities of color all sharing similar experiences." Admiral Carter's fork clattered against his plate, his appetite suddenly gone. "What exactly are they saying, Alicia?" She looked up, her journalistic instincts clearly piqued. "It's not just about seating anymore, Dad. There are allegations of racial profiling in security screenings, random searches that seem anything but random, even claims of entire flights being restructured to accommodate certain passengers at the expense of others." The weight of what he was hearing settled heavily on Admiral Carter's shoulders. This was bigger than he had imagined, and he was right in the middle of it. As much as he wanted to shield Alicia from the storm that was brewing, he knew she was too smart and too determined to be kept in the dark. "Sweetheart," he began, choosing his words carefully, "there's something I need to tell you about my flight yesterday." As he recounted the events, from the initial ticket mix-up to the captain's surprising announcement, Alicia's expression shifted from surprise to concern to barely contained excitement. "Dad, do you realize what this means? You could be a key witness in exposing this whole thing." Before Admiral Carter could respond, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Thompson. "Sir, I'm at the agreed location. There's someone here you need to meet." Apologizing to Alicia, Admiral Carter excused himself and made his way to a quiet corner of the restaurant. He dialed Thompson's number, his mind racing with possibilities. Who could this mystery person be? Thompson answered on the first ring, his voice tight with tension. "Admiral, I'm sorry to interrupt your family time, but this couldn't wait. I'm here with Sarah, the check-in agent from yesterday's flight. She's terrified, sir. Says she has information that could blow this whole thing wide open, but she's afraid for her job, maybe even her safety." Admiral Carter's military training kicked in, his voice steady as he replied, "Understood, Michael. I'm on my way. Keep her calm and don't let her leave." As he returned to the table, Admiral Carter found himself at a crossroads. He looked at Alicia, her face alight with the glow of accomplishment and the thrill of a breaking story. In that moment, he made a decision that would alter the course of events to come. "Alicia," he said, his voice filled with a mix of pride and trepidation, "how would you like to put that journalism degree to work right now?" Her eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed with determination. "What did you have in mind, Dad?" As they left the restaurant, Admiral Carter briefed Alicia on the situation, his military precision melding with her rapid-fire questions. They were an unlikely pair, the decorated Navy admiral and the freshly graduated journalist. But together, they might just have what it took to unravel this growing scandal. Across town, in a nondescript coffee shop, Lieutenant Commander Thompson sat across from a visibly shaken Sarah. Her hands trembled as she clutched her coffee cup, eyes darting nervously to the door every few seconds. "They'll be here soon," Thompson reassured her, though his own nerves were on edge. He knew that what they were about to discuss could have far-reaching consequences, not just for the airline industry, but for the broader conversation about racial equality in America. As Admiral Carter and Alicia navigated the Atlanta traffic, The story was spreading like wildfire across social media. Hashtags were trending, personal accounts were being shared, and calls for investigations were growing louder by the minute. In the offices of major news networks, producers scrambled to piece together the emerging narrative. Phones rang off the hook as reporters chased leads and sought official comments. The airline industry was in damage control mode, with PR teams working overtime to craft responses and CEOs huddling in emergency meetings. And in Washington, D.C., behind closed doors, concerned whispers were growing into urgent discussions. If these allegations proved true, the implications could be staggering, potentially leading to policy changes, legal battles, and a nationwide reckoning with deeply ingrained prejudices. As Admiral Carter pulled into the coffee shop parking lot, he took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. He looked over at Alicia, seeing in her eyes a mixture of excitement and apprehension that mirrored his own feelings. "Are you ready for this?" he asked, knowing that whatever happened next would likely change both their lives. Alicia nodded, her jaw set with determination. "Let's go make a difference, Dad." Together, they stepped out of the car and walked towards the coffee shop, unaware that they were about to become key players in a story that would captivate the nation and spark a long-overdue conversation about equality, privilege, and the true meaning of service. As Admiral Carter and Alicia entered the coffee shop, the buzz of conversation momentarily hushed. Lieutenant Commander Thompson waved them over to a secluded corner booth where Sarah sat, her eyes wide with a mix of relief and apprehension. The gravity of the situation was palpable as they settled into their seats. "Thank you for coming, Admiral," Thompson said, his voice low. "Sarah, this is Admiral Carter and his daughter, Alicia. They're here to help." Sarah nodded, her hands fidgeting with a crumpled napkin. I don't know where to start," she stammered. Alicia leaned forward, her journalist instincts kicking in. "Start from the beginning, Sarah. What made you decide to come forward?" As Sarah began to speak, her story unfolded like a complex tapestry of corporate pressure, unethical practices, and deeply ingrained biases. She revealed a system of coded language and unofficial policies designed to cater to a select group of passengers while subtly discriminating against others, particularly people of color and those in uniform. "It wasn't always obvious," Sarah explained, her voice gaining strength. "At first, it was just suggestions to enhance the customer experience for certain travelers. But over time, the implications became clear. We were being pushed to profile passengers, to make assumptions based on appearance or name alone." As she spoke, Admiral Carter felt a mix of anger and sadness wash over him. He had faced discrimination throughout his career, but to hear how systematically it had been implemented in what should have been a neutral service industry was deeply troubling. Alicia, meanwhile, was furiously taking notes, her journalistic training allowing her to pick up on key details and potential leads. "Sarah, do you have any documentation of these policies or communications?" Sarah nodded, reaching into her bag with trembling hands. She produced a flash drive, holding it like it was both precious and dangerous. "Everything's on here. Emails, memos, even some recorded meetings. I can lose everything for this." Admiral Carter placed a reassuring hand on Sarah's arm. "You're doing the right thing. We'll make sure your bravery doesn't go unnoticed or unprotected." As they discussed the contents of the flash drive, the coffee shop around them continued its normal bustle, oblivious to the bombshell conversation happening in their midst. Outside, the Atlanta afternoon sun beat down on the pavement, but inside, a chill had settled over their booth. Suddenly, Thompson's phone buzzed. His face paled as he read the message. "Sir," he said, addressing Admiral Carter, "we may have a problem. My CO just texted. There's chatter about a leak, and they're looking into recent flights and passenger manifests. It won't take them long to connect the dots to yesterday's flight." The tension at the table ratcheted up several notches. They were now in a race against time. If they didn't act quickly, the evidence could be buried, and Sarah could face severe consequences. "We need to get this information to someone who can act on it immediately," Admiral Carter said, his military training kicking in. "Alicia, you mentioned your internship at the news network. Do you have any contacts there who could be trusted with this?" Alicia nodded, already scrolling through her phone. "I know just the person. She's a senior investigative reporter, known for her integrity and fearlessness in tackling big stories." As Alicia stepped away to make the call, Admiral Carter turned to Sarah and Thompson. We need to move quickly, but carefully. Sarah, are you prepared for what might come next? Once this story breaks, there will be no going back. Sarah took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. I've been carrying this weight for too long, Admiral. I'm ready to see it through, whatever the cost. Just then, Alicia returned to the table, her face flushed with excitement. My contact is interested. She wants to meet us right away. She says this could be the biggest story of the year. As they prepared to leave, Admiral Carter's phone rang. The caller ID showed it was from the Navy's Public Affairs Office. His heart raced as he answered, Admiral Carter speaking. The voice on the other end was tense. Admiral, we've got a situation developing. There are rumors flying about discriminatory practices in air travel, and your name has come up. We need you to come in for a briefing immediately. Admiral Carter's mind raced. This was moving faster than he had anticipated. He knew that his next words and actions could determine the course of not just his career, but potentially the outcome of this entire situation. Understood, he replied, keeping his voice steady. I'll be there as soon as possible. As he hung up, he looked at the expectant faces around him. They were at a crossroads, and the next few hours would be critical. The evidence they had could expose a systemic issue affecting thousands, but it could also end careers and spark a national controversy. All right, Admiral Carter said, his voice filled with determination. Here's what we're going to do. As they left the coffee shop, the weight of their decisions hung heavy in the air. They were about to step into the eye of a storm that had been brewing for years. The truth was finally coming to light, but at what cost? With each step towards their cars, the tension built. They knew that powerful forces would soon be aligning against them. The race to reveal the truth before it could be suppressed was on, and the clock was ticking. As they pulled out of the parking lot, heading towards what could be the most important meeting of their lives, none of them could shake the feeling that they were being watched. The game was afoot, and the stakes couldn't be higher. As Admiral Carter's car wound through Atlanta's busy streets, the tension inside was palpable. Alicia sat beside him, fingers flying over her phone's keyboard as she coordinated with her contact at the news network. In the back seat, Sarah clutched the flash drive containing the damning evidence, her knuckles white with anxiety. Suddenly, Alicia gasped. Dad, you need to see this. She held up her phone, displaying a breaking news alert. The headline read, Major Airline CEO steps down amid discrimination allegations. Admiral Carter's brow furrowed. This was moving faster than they'd anticipated. What else does it say? As Alicia began to read aloud, a black SUV swerved into their lane, cutting them off abruptly. Admiral Carter's military reflexes kicked in as he expertly maneuvered the car, narrowly avoiding a collision. What the hell? Alicia exclaimed, her heart racing. Before anyone could catch their breath, another SUV appeared in the rearview mirror, its tinted windows hiding the occupants within. It was clear now they were being followed. Hold on, Admiral Carter said calmly, his years of training evident in his steady voice. He made a sharp turn down a side street, hoping to lose their pursuers, but the SUVs matched their every move, staying close behind. As they weaved through traffic, Sarah's phone rang. Her face paled as she saw the caller ID. It's my supervisor, she whispered, her voice trembling. Admiral Carter made a split-second decision. Answer it. Act normal. We need to buy time. Sarah took a deep breath and answered the call. Hello. Her voice quavered slightly, but she managed to keep her composure as she listened to the voice on the other end. After a tense minute, she hung up, her face ashen. They know. Somehow, they know I took the files. They're threatening legal action if I don't return them immediately. The stakes had just been raised exponentially. They were now not only racing against time, but also against unknown forces trying to silence them. The evidence they carried had become both their greatest asset and their biggest liability. As they approached a red light, Admiral Carter made another quick decision. Alicia, I need you to take Sarah and the flash drive to your contact at the news network. I'll deal with our followers and meet you there. Alicia's eyes widened. Dad, no, we can't split up now. But there was no time to argue. As the light turned green, Admiral Carter pulled over sharply. Go now, he commanded, his voice carrying the full weight of his military authority. Reluctantly, Alicia and Sarah exited the car, quickly blending into the crowd on the sidewalk. As they disappeared from view, Admiral Carter pulled back into traffic, the two SUVs still hot on his tail. His mind raced as he formulated a plan. He needed to lose his pursuers without endangering civilian traffic. Drawing on his years of tactical training, he began to execute a series of complex maneuvers, weaving through side streets and doubling back on his route. Meanwhile, Alicia and Sarah hurried through the city streets, constantly looking over their shoulders. They were only a few blocks from the news network's offices when Sarah suddenly stopped in her tracks. "Wait," she said, her voice filled with a mix of realization and dread. "There's something I haven't told you, something that could change everything." Alicia's journalistic instincts kicked into high gear. "What is it, Sarah?" Sarah took a deep breath, her eyes darting nervously around them. "The discrimination. It goes higher than just the airline. There are government officials involved, high-ranking ones. The flash drive, it has evidence of their participation." This revelation hit Alicia like a thunderbolt. What had started as an expose of airline industry practices had just expanded into potential government corruption. The implications were staggering. As this bombshell sank in, Alicia's phone buzzed with an incoming call. It was her contact at the news network. "Alicia," the voice on the other end said urgently, "where are you? You need to get here now. We just received word that a rival network is about to break a major story about airline discrimination. We're running out of time." The race was now on multiple fronts. Admiral Carter was trying to outmaneuver unknown pursuers. Alicia and Sarah were rushing to break the story before it could be suppressed or scooped, and powerful forces were mobilizing to protect their interests. As the sun began to set over Atlanta, casting long shadows across the city, the various players in this high-stakes drama converged. Admiral Carter, having finally lost his tail, was speeding towards the news network. Alicia and Sarah were just entering the building, the flash drive burning a hole in Sarah's pocket. And across the city, in boardrooms and government offices, emergency meetings were being called as the threat of exposure loomed. The stage was set for a confrontation that would have far-reaching consequences. As elevator doors opened onto the bustling newsroom floor, Alicia and Sarah stepped out, unaware that they were about to set in motion a chain of events that would shake the foundations of power in America. The truth was finally coming to light, but at what cost? And who would be left standing when the dust settled? As Alicia and Sarah burst into the newsroom, the atmosphere was electric. Reporters huddled around monitors, phones rang incessantly, and the air buzzed with the energy of a breaking story. Alicia's contact, veteran investigative journalist Mara Chen, rushed to meet them. "Thank God you're here," Mara said, ushering them to a quiet corner. "We're ready to go live in 20 minutes. What have you got?" Sarah's hands shook as she handed over the flash drive. "Everything's on here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But there's more. This goes beyond just the airline. There are government officials involved." Mara's eyes widened as she plugged in the drive. "This is bigger than we thought. We need to move fast." As they huddled around Mara's computer, sifting through the damning evidence, Admiral Carter finally arrived. His uniform was disheveled, and a thin sheen of sweat covered his brow, but his eyes burned with determination. "Dad," Alicia exclaimed, rushing to embrace him. "Are you okay? What happened?" Before he could answer, a commotion erupted at the newsroom entrance. A group of men in dark suits pushed their way in, led by a face Admiral Carter recognized instantly, Senator William Hawthorne, chair of the Transportation Committee. "Admiral Carter," the senator called out, his voice carrying across the room. "I think it's time we had a talk." The newsroom fell silent as all eyes turned to the confrontation unfolding before them. Admiral Carter stepped forward, placing himself between the senator and his daughter. "With all due respect, Senator," Admiral Carter said, his voice steady, "I believe the American people deserve to hear the truth." Senator Hawthorne's face darkened. "You don't understand the consequences of what you're about to do. National security is at stake here." As tension filled the air, Mara stepped forward, her laptop in hand. "Senator, we have evidence of systematic discrimination against military personnel and people of color, orchestrated at the highest levels of the airline industry and government. Care to comment?" The senator's composure cracked for a moment before he regained his cool demeanor. These are serious allegations. We'll need time to investigate properly. Time's up, Senator, Alicia interjected, her voice strong. We go live in 5 minutes. Suddenly, Sarah gasped. All eyes turned to her as she stared at her phone in disbelief. It's an email from the airline CEO. He's offering to testify. Says he can't be part of the cover-up any longer. The room erupted in a flurry of activity. Reporters scrambled to update their stories. Producers shouted instructions, and the clock ticked relentlessly towards the live broadcast. As the cameras prepared to roll, Admiral Carter found himself facing a decision that would define his career and potentially change the course of the nation. He looked at Alicia, saw the fire in her eyes, and knew what he had to do. Senator, he said, turning to face Hawthorne, I've served this country for over 3 decades. I've faced enemy fire, made life-or-death decisions, but I've never been more certain of anything than I am of this. The truth must come out. With those words, Admiral Carter stepped in front of the camera, flanked by Alicia, Sarah, and Mara. As the red light blinked on, he began to speak, his voice clear and unwavering. My fellow Americans, what I'm about to share with you will be shocking and, for many, painful to hear. But it is the truth, and it is a truth that demands action. For the next hour, the nation watched transfixed as the story unfolded. Admiral Carter recounted his personal experience, Sarah provided insider testimony, and Mara presented the damning evidence from the flash drive. The scope of the discrimination was staggering, reaching from airport check-in counters to the halls of Congress. As the broadcast neared its end, a final twist emerged. Senator Hawthorne, seeing the writing on the wall, stepped forward to make a statement. But instead of the expected denial or deflection, he did something that shocked everyone. I can no longer be part of this, he said, his voice heavy with emotion. Admiral Carter is right. The American people deserve the truth. And the truth is, I've been complicit in this system for far too long. I'm prepared to resign my position and cooperate fully with any investigation. The newsroom erupted in chaos as reporters rushed to update their stories. Social media exploded with reactions, and phones across Washington, D.C. began ringing off the hook. In the midst of the frenzy, Admiral Carter pulled Alicia and Sarah aside. This is just the beginning, he said, his voice filled with a mix of pride and determination. The real work starts now. As they stood together, watching the world react to their revelation, they knew that they had set in motion changes that would ripple through society for years to come. The fight against discrimination had taken a significant step forward, but the journey was far from over. The story of the Black Navy Admiral denied first class had become so much more. It had become a catalyst for national introspection and, hopefully, lasting change. As the cameras finally stopped rolling and the adrenaline began to subside, Admiral Carter, Alicia, and Sarah shared a look of quiet triumph. They had faced their fears, stood up for what was right, and in doing so, had written a new chapter in the ongoing story of America's quest for true equality. In the days following the explosive broadcast, the nation found itself in the midst of a profound reckoning. Admiral Carter's revelations had sparked a firestorm of public outrage, congressional inquiries, and calls for sweeping reforms across the airline industry and beyond. The story of discrimination that had begun with a denied first-class seat had ballooned into a national conversation about systemic bias and the abuse of power. As the dust began to settle, Admiral Carter found himself thrust into the spotlight as an unexpected civil rights icon. Interview requests flooded in from major news networks, and his inbox overflowed with messages of support from fellow service members and civilians alike. Despite the attention, he remained focused on the larger goal, ensuring that the momentum for change didn't fade away. Alicia, riding the wave of her involvement in breaking the story, saw her fledgling journalism career take off. Her internship at the news network quickly turned into a full-time position, and she found herself at the forefront of covering the ongoing investigations and reforms. Her unique perspective as both a journalist and the daughter of a key figure in the story gave her insights that other reporters couldn't match. Sarah, initially fearful of repercussions, found an outpouring of support from colleagues and strangers alike. Her bravery in coming forward had inspired others within the airline industry to speak out about their own experiences and observations. As investigations progressed, it became clear that her actions had been the key to unlocking a trove of evidence that might otherwise have remained hidden. In Washington, D.C., the fallout was seismic. Senator Hawthorne's shocking on-air resignation was just the beginning. As promised, he cooperated fully with investigators, providing crucial testimony that implicated several other high-ranking officials. The web of corruption and discriminatory practices proved to be more extensive than anyone had initially suspected, reaching into multiple government agencies and corporate boardrooms. The airline industry, facing intense scrutiny and public backlash, scrambled to implement reforms. Major carriers announced comprehensive reviews of their policies, mandatory bias training for all employees, and the establishment of independent oversight committees. The CEO who had come forward to testify became an unlikely ally in the push for change, working closely with civil rights organizations to develop new industry standards. Lieutenant Commander Michael Thompson, whose initial recognition of Admiral Carter had set the whole chain of events in motion, found himself hailed as a hero within the Navy. His actions had not only exposed wrongdoing, but had also sparked important conversations about race and rank within the military. As a result, the Navy accelerated its efforts to promote diversity and inclusion, with Admiral Carter often called upon to speak to young officers about integrity and moral courage. As weeks turned into months, the story remained in the national spotlight. Congressional hearings were held, with Admiral Carter, Sarah, and others testifying about their experiences and the evidence they had uncovered. The hearings were often emotional, with powerful testimony from individuals who had faced discrimination not just in air travel, but in various aspects of American life. One particularly poignant moment came when a young soldier, inspired by Admiral Carter's story, shared his own experiences of discrimination while in uniform. His tearful testimony brought home the human cost of the systemic biases that had been allowed to flourish unchecked for so long. The impact of the revelations extended far beyond the airline industry and government. Corporations across America began to take a hard look at their own practices, fearing they might be the next to face public scrutiny. Diversity and inclusion initiatives that had once been relegated to HR departments suddenly became top priorities for CEOs and boards of directors. In the midst of all this, Admiral Carter found moments of quiet reflection. He thought back to his early days in the Navy, the challenges he had faced, and the mentors who had supported him along the way. He realized that his entire career had been leading to this moment, not just to expose wrongdoing, but to pave the way for lasting change. 6 months after the initial broadcast, Admiral Carter stood at a podium in Washington, D.C., addressing a crowd gathered for the signing of the Fair Travel and Transportation Act. The comprehensive legislation, born out of the scandal, aimed to eliminate discrimination in all forms of public transportation and strengthen oversight of the airline industry. As he spoke, Admiral Carter's words carried the weight of his experiences and the hope for a better future. Today, we take a significant step forward in our ongoing journey toward a more perfect union, he said, his voice strong and clear. And let us not forget that laws alone cannot change hearts and minds. True equality requires constant vigilance and a commitment from each of us to recognize and challenge bias wherever we encounter it. In the audience, Alicia beamed with pride as she recorded her father's speech for a special report. Beside her sat Sarah, who had become an outspoken advocate for whistleblower protections and corporate accountability. The two women, brought together by extraordinary circumstances, had formed a lasting friendship built on their shared commitment to truth and justice. As the applause faded and the ceremonial pens were distributed, Admiral Carter found himself reflecting on the whirlwind of the past months. The path had not been easy. There had been threats, attempts at character assassination, and moments of doubt. But standing there, seeing the tangible results of their efforts, he knew it had all been worth it. Later that evening, as Admiral Carter shared a quiet dinner with Alicia, Sarah, and Lieutenant Commander Thompson, the conversation turned to the future. What's next? Alicia asked, her reporter's instinct always looking for the next story. Admiral Carter smiled, a twinkle in his eye. There's still so much work to be done, he said. This was just one battle in a much larger war against discrimination and injustice, but I have hope. I look at all of you, and I see the next generation of leaders who will carry this fight forward. As they raised their glasses in a toast, the weight of their accomplishments and the challenges still ahead hung in the air. They had changed the course of history, but they knew that the journey towards true equality was far from over. In the years that followed, the story of the Black Navy Admiral denied first class became more than just a scandal or a headline. It became a case study in courage, a testament to the power of speaking truth to power, and a reminder that change often begins with a single act of defiance. Admiral Carter continued to serve as a beacon of integrity, using his platform to advocate for equality and mentoring young people from diverse backgrounds. Alicia's career in journalism flourished as she dedicated herself to uncovering stories of injustice and giving voice to the voiceless. Sarah found her calling in corporate ethics, consulting with companies to help them build more inclusive cultures. And across America, in airports and train stations, in boardrooms and classrooms, the conversations continued. Slowly but surely, attitudes began to shift, policies were re-examined, and a new generation came of age with a deeper understanding of the ongoing struggle for equality. As the story of Admiral Carter and his fateful flight faded into history, its impact lived on. It served as a powerful reminder that one person's stand for justice could ignite a movement, that courage was contagious, and that the arc of history, while long, could indeed be bent towards justice, one brave action at a time.